Pattern. Pattern is a really important element in interior design, but it can also be a kind of challenging one. Now, the good news is a lot of the rules that used to apply to working with pattern don't really matter much anymore. Gone are the days of having a wallpaper with coordinating border and a matching fabric. People are experimenting with pattern in new and interesting ways. Certainly, there are still some guidelines that can be helpful when you're working with pattern, especially if you're new to it and you're maybe feeling a little bit intimidated. So that is what today's video is about. Pattern and how to work with it. I've got a bunch of tips and tricks to help you feel more confident about using pattern, and I've got lots of inspiration images of spaces that have used pattern in cool and unique ways. So are you ready? Let's get started. An easy way to get started with pattern is to just choose one for the space. Now, if you are only going to have one pattern, you really want to make it count. So pick something that is going to have a lot of impact. It could be a rug, a wallpaper, a fabric. Just make sure it's something that you really love and make it a focal point. Another great thing about pattern is that it can be an excellent starting point for planning the rest of your decor. It can really set the tone for the space and become the piece that you develop your whole concept around. It can also be super helpful when you're figuring out a color scheme, because you can pull different colors from that pattern to use on different elements within the space. Now, what if you want to combine multiple patterns in a space? This does require a little more skill, but it's also really impactful, so it's worth the extra effort. And there are some tips that can make this process a little easier. Consider color. While not every pattern has to coordinate perfectly with one another, having at least one color that is repeated throughout the patterns definitely helps bring a sense of continuity. Or another way to go about this is to take each color from your color scheme and apply them separately to a different pattern. So rather than having a few multicolor patterns, you can use separate tone-on-tone patterns that once combined provide the added interest and contrast. Scale is another really important consideration. You want to have a variety of sizes in your patterns. Too many large scale patterns can feel really overwhelming, and too many small patterns can feel really busy. And of course, the type of pattern is also a really important consideration. Variety is key. Pairing a floral print with other florals can be really tricky, but pairing that floral with a stripe is usually a pretty fail-safe way to go. Now, of course, these are just tips and not hard and fast rules. So if you're feeling daring, you can experiment outside of these guidelines. If you want to keep it low commitment, this could just be swapping out some throw pillows on your sofa. Or if you really want to go bold, it could be a maximalist space full of a variety of interesting pattern. Do what feels right for you. When it comes to materials, I think we most often associate pattern with things like wallpaper and textiles. But don't overlook other sources of pattern. Tile, for example, can be a great option. Whether it's a tile that has a print or a solid color tile that can be installed in a way to create a pattern. Architectural elements can also be sources of pattern. Pattern is defined as a design created from the repetition of lines, shapes, or colors. So a window with mullions creates a grid pattern, or a room divider like this creates a pattern of lines. And don't forget about the elements of natural pattern. So the graining of wood or the veining of marble are also sources of pattern. Okay, now that we have covered some of the basics on how to work with pattern, let's take a look at some spaces that have utilized pattern really effectively. I think this room is a great example of how to use pattern in a neutral interior. The pattern of the drapes is really small and soft and pretty, while the gingham on the pillow is a nice contrast by being a little larger and bolder, but the colors still relate to each other. And then you also have this very small, subtle lattice pattern in the rattan headboard. All of these elements just work together really nicely. Here is a room that isn't neutral at all. There is a lot of color happening here. What I find really interesting about this space is the way that they have really ignored the guidelines about combining types of pattern. There are like 6 different stripes happening here, but they're all very different in color and size and direction, and it keeps it feeling really interesting. At first glance, it might feel a little bit random, but if you look more closely, you'll notice that most of the colors in the space are repeated in at least 2 elements, and it does give an overall feeling of cohesion. This is a great example of a skillfully executed mixing of patterns. If you look closely at the headboard, you'll see that that fabric has a combination of blue, yellow, and green. Each of those colors has then been used again separately in other patterns. The blue wallpaper, the yellow in the bedding, and the green in the throw pillow. These patterns all work together really well because you've got a variety of styles and sizes and a really nice balance of color. If you're looking for an easy to follow formula for mixing patterns, copy what they've done here. Here we have another bedroom with patterned bedding that feels completely different, but the method that they've used is actually quite similar. All of the colors that are in the bed skirt have all been repeated in other elements of the bedding. These are selections that were carefully planned, but it doesn't feel that way. It just looks easy and relaxed, which is actually a really good indicator that it's been done well. I just love how bold and fun this living room is. Now, when it comes to patterned upholstery, it can be a big commitment. When you're looking at large investment pieces like a sofa, it certainly is safer to stay with solids. But if you are going to go with a pattern, I think a stripe is a really smart choice. Impactful, but still relatively easy to work with. And here is an example of another striped sofa. Much narrower stripe and the resulting look completely different. I just thought this tile was really interesting. I mean, you do see a lot of tile done in a checkerboard pattern, but it's far less common to see it in a grid pattern like what has been done here. A really bold and graphic element that helps to break up all of the red. Not unlike the last image of the powder room, this kid's bedroom is an example of how you can use graphic black and white prints to add pattern to a space where you already have a lot of color happening. When you first look at this space, you might assume that the only pattern is the rug, but this tall wooden cabinet with its many repeating glass doors is also a source of pattern. The stripes on this fireplace are a great reminder of how you can use paint to create pattern, a surprising choice that I think makes this room feel really unique. When you think about adding pattern to a space, furniture, especially case goods, are maybe not one of your top considerations, but these cabinets are so stunning and so impactful, and I really like the juxtaposition of them against that rug. Okay, there is a lot going on in this space, and yes, for a lot of people, this would probably be considered a little too much pattern, but you certainly can't call it boring. And while it might seem like there is just so much happening here, there is a through line of black, white, and red, which does provide a certain degree of continuity. I just think this space is so interesting and unusual. You've got the stripes in this rug that are then repeated on the table. And then you've got this really graphic black and white stripe in the wall tile. And all of these colors all combine in the pattern of the terrazzo floor. So cool. Well, my friends, we have reached the conclusion of this lesson on pattern. I have to say, I found a ton of great images on Pinterest when I was researching this video. So I've put them all on the board. I will link it in the description. So if you're looking for any more ideas or inspiration on working with pattern, be sure to check that out. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. I hope we see you at the next one, and bye for now.